Hello, this week we are going to look at two major concepts that will help us observe more things in art and visual texts. The first major concept is rhetoric. How can we think about works of art and written texts and visual texts as attempts to persuade an audience? And how can we use that framework to discern the strategies that are being employed in the work of art to persuade us as the viewers? The second major principle is compositional analysis. How are things in paintings and other visual texts composed to convey meaning? Both of these concepts together are going to help you go to the next level in your close reading of art. The first half of this lesson deals with the concept of rhetoric, and corresponding to that part of the lesson, I am having you complete the activity in which you watch and analyze two short videos. The second half of this video lesson will introduce compositional features, and I will have you practice that by analyzing the compositional features in a work of art.
All right, so let's begin by looking at what is called the rhetorical triangle. The rhetorical triangle was described by Aristotle, who was thinking about how people persuade each other. What is it that we do what is it that we say, and how do we say it that makes people actually change their minds? All right, this is the science of, or the study of rhetoric, and the word rhetoric simply means persuasion, the art of persuasion. So how do we persuade each other? Well, in thinking about that, Aristotle described what he called the rhetorical triangle, which is to say that every act of rhetoric, every attempt to persuade somebody, is always implying at least a three-part structure. Somebody, that's the author, is saying something, that's the audience, that's the message to an audience for a specific purpose. All right, so I say I'm trying to talk to you right now about what rhetoric is. You are my audience. I'm the author or the speaker, and I have a specific purpose why I'm doing this. I have a reason for this lesson. Now, what this part in here means, this is the message, or you can just replace the word message with text. This is the text inside the triangle. The act of the text, the act of the message, implies these three parts: the author, the audience, the purpose. Now, what does this tell us? This tells us that in any rhetorical act, any time somebody says something or shows something to somebody, you can analyze it by starting by identifying what these three parts of the triangle are. Who is saying what to whom, and why are they saying it? And that why question is perhaps the most important. What is the purpose behind the act of speaking or writing or creating a visual? What is the purpose behind that? Is it a teacher trying to teach something to a student? Is it a corporation trying to sell something to an audience? Is it a politician trying to persuade an audience to vote for him or her? All right. If you know the rhetorical situation, if you understand what's going on in the triangle, you can more easily identify the purpose. And once you can identify the purpose, you'll be able to see the ways in which a text is put together to try to arrive at that purpose. Okay, and we'll do lots of examples of that in a minute. And there's another part about rhetoric that you need to think about, and that is it's a different triangle. There's two different triangles here. They're different triangles. They're separate, but they're both very important to understand how rhetorical persuasion works. The first triangle was what happens in any rhetorical act: author, audience, purpose. The second triangle is the three ways that persuasion happens in the message. Aristotle calls these the three appeals, or the three modes of persuasion. And they are logos, pathos, and ethos. These are the Greek words for these three modes of persuasion. All right, what are these three modes of persuasion? Logos This is about syllogisms, deductive, inductive reasoning, offering evidence, putting your argument in an order that makes sense. The logical appeal of an argument tells us why something rationally makes sense to do it or to believe it. Now, Aristotle posited that just simple logic is not enough to persuade people. This is an interesting thing about human nature to think about. It's not enough to just say, if A, X, then Y, X, therefore Y. People aren't quite persuaded simply by cold, hard reasoning. And Aristotle reasons that this is because, as human beings, we are emotional. We have what he calls the irascible parts of our souls, which means that we are not just brains, we actually are bodies as well, and we have feelings and emotions in the connection between our bodies and brains. And so we need something more to persuade us besides logic, and that is pathos, or the emotional appeal. Pathos just means emotions. So the pathetic appeal, or pathos, is the part of rhetoric that looks at how messages or texts are constructed to create specific emotional effects in the viewers or the audience or the reader, how those words or visuals create emotional effects, and why those emotional effects help to persuade. Yeah, Aristotle says you can hear a very cold logical argument but not be moved to action. And there are some very basic, about 5 or 6 really basic emotions that all persuasive, pathetic appeals really use, because human beings are pretty simple. There's only so many emotions we really are moved to action by, and they're here: sympathy or pity for another person, fear, anger, very powerful emotions. A sense of belonging, like being part of a tribe, right? So a lot of parts of our political situation right now in the United States are driven by this emotion. What race or political affiliation do I belong to? And there's a lot of tension about senses of belonging. And then pride or vanity. I want to look or feel like I'm valued or good. Very powerful emotions. So these are about the 5 different emotional options you have when you're persuading somebody. And I should also mention that you shouldn't, if you're thinking about creating a text, you shouldn't overdo it on the pathos, right? If people notice that you're trying to appeal to their emotions, they get skeptical. So this has to be done subtly, through suggestion, through subtle word choices. So those are 2 very important parts, rhetoric. But there's actually a third part, perhaps a secret weapon, a less appreciated part that people think about less often, or I should say, is more subtly or more implicit in messages. It's a little more invisible, and that's is ethos, or the ethical appeal. The adjectival form of that is ethical appeal for ethos. This Greek word means the moral credibility or believability of a speaker. This is about trying to get the audience to make sure that they think the speaker has their best interests in mind. Why should I believe you, politician? Why should I believe you, commercial or teacher? Do you have my best interests in mind? Do you share my values? And if I don't believe, as a listener or an audience member, if I don't believe that you share my values, if you're the speaker talking to me, or the commercial advertising to me, if I don't believe you share my values, I'm much less likely to be persuaded and to be moved to action and buy the product or vote. Even if your logic is great, even if you've pricked some emotions in me, if there's red flags going on with credibility, you don't seem trustworthy. That's another great way to think about it, that you're trustworthy. If you don't seem trustworthy, I'm not likely going to ultimately be persuaded. I'm going to hold back. What are some things? How do you establish good ethos? Really good question, right? What do you do? Maybe, let's say you're just a college student and you have to give a presentation. You're not a well-known person. How do your reputation doesn't precede you, good or bad? How do you create good ethos? Well, these are some of the ways you do that. You have to show your audience that you have their best interest in mind, and that's called ingratiating yourself to your audience. And you ingratiate yourself to your audience by showing that you share their same values. You share their same values. Now, that's kind of a complicated thing. How do you strategically do that? I'll try to show you some where it's happening, and when you start to see it, I think it becomes more apparent when you're analyzing texts. You can establish credibility in your you can create a reputation for yourself in the text by showing in some way that you are well trained to talk about this topic, or that you have experience. Maybe you have let's talk about maybe good canoes. You want to sell a good canoe to somebody. Well, maybe you're trained in good canoes, or maybe you have experience with years of using different types of canoes. And so sometimes you do have a credibility that comes from your credentials. And you can appeal to that. You can just say that, or you can imply that in your message. I have this experience. That's why you should trust me. I know what I'm talking about. You can establish good ethos through modesty. People want to see, are you a good person? Do you seem to have balanced moral judgment? And part of showing that you have balanced moral judgment and therefore are trustworthy as a person is showing that you are a modest person. And part of showing you're a modest person is that you only say what you can actually support. You don't go further, you don't overblow things, you don't amplify things or become hyperbolic or go overboard. You stay with what is what you can actually support, what you can back up, putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak. That modesty goes a long way with people. Another thing that goes a long way with people is showing that you, as a human being, are aware that the world is complicated, that people are complicated, that there aren't easy answers to things, and showing in some way a tolerance for ambiguity and complexity in difficult issues, especially, is a great way to establish credibility. Another way to establish credibility is to show that you are a professional person. You either look good or your presentation looks good. And so that shows that you're serious, that you have care about what you do. I like to tell students this is why it matters that your papers look correctly formatted and well edited when you submit them, because it establishes credibility with your audience. It might just be your professor or your future employer, your future supervisor who you're applying for a job to, but that professional looking document establishes credibility. It's really an ethical appeal. You're trying to persuade them to give you a good grade or a job. And then finally, what this really all amounts to is that you're a trustworthy, sensible human being, and that makes people feel safe, right? You're not some kind of automaton robot or superhuman person who has no flaws, or at least no human desires. You're a human being in some way, and because again, you're trying to show that you share the values of your audience. So Aristotle says excellent rhetorical texts, things that persuade very effectively, are doing all three of these very well. All three are working. All three are successful. They're all happening in a text at any time. You can look at a text for its logical structure. You can look at a text for its emotional argument. And you can look at a text for how it tries to establish credibility. They're all in there. And so you have to, in a rhetorical analysis, you have to look at a text to ask how well is a text doing on these appeals? Okay, that's a lot of background information, a lot of exposition. Let's just get to some examples. I'm going to start with an example or two of these three appeals working in written texts, and then we're going to look at visual text, images. So here is a regular text, very simple argument. Let's look how it's put together. How does the author, Dvorak, appeal to logic, emotions, and the ethical appeal or credibility? How does he do that? And we can analyze that even in just this small piece. We can just look at a few choices that he makes. Let's start with the first thing, logic. Where does he have logic in his argument? Well, one thing you can see here is he gets into some nitty gritty factual things about the history of baseball. The bases were created, the distance between bases and mound were created when the ball was being thrown very much slower. Right? So just using, and the numbers show the argument here. It is not good to have lots of injuries in baseball or to subject baseball players to danger, right? So let's mitigate or minimize the danger, and this is one way we can do it. So baseball has gotten dangerous. Here's a practical solution. Boom. That's in a nutshell. This is like the logical structure of this argument. Where in this small text do you see potentially words or phrases that might create an emotional response in the reader? It could be something that's said just to incite our emotions or feelings, or it could be something that's implied. All right. So look at the word choice here and see how it might create some emotions. Every year, too many baseball players, both hitters and pitchers, have their faces crushed, eye sockets fractured, and brains concussed because the pitcher's mound is too close to the batter's box. Now, if you're thinking that the harsh terms in here, or there's some harsh word choices, crushed, faces crushed, that's a very visceral phrase. Eye sockets fractured. Nobody, when you hear that phrase, you can imagine or almost feel in your face, if you're a very sensitive person, you can almost feel your eye sockets kind of twinge a little bit in your brain subconsciously because of the idea that the sense based word choices here. Crushed, eye sockets fractured, brains concussed. These are visceral words, graphic almost, right? So this is a statement of fact. Every year too many. This happens to too many people, but it's more than just the logic here. This is also an emotional response. After you read this, Will wants you to feel like this is a very bad thing. He doesn't say that this is bad, but that's clearly what he means, because these concepts, crushed faces and eye sockets fractured, we all know as general human beings, this is bad. What feeling are we feeling? I would say we're feeling sympathy or pity for the baseball players. We don't want them to be subjected to needless suffering, right? That's a human emotion, and that's easily incited by saying something like this. All right, so there's already something important to notice here. Logic and rhetoric, logic and emotion and ethical appeals, they all happen overlapping at the same time in texts. It's not like this is only logic in here and this is only emotions in here. Sometimes they happen kind of by themselves, but most of the time they're always overlapping. Now, what about the ethical appeal, credibility? That we think that where in here do we maybe feel that Will Dvorak is or isn't trustworthy? This one is, again, this is the most invisible or subtle one, because people don't come out very often and say, you must trust me on this because of something I've done or because of my beliefs. But the way to look for this is, where does Will share our values? Well, again, in an overlapping kind of way, this is emotional because of the words used and the people he's talking about. But he also is showing us that he values protection of the young. He values protecting everybody from needless suffering, but he also he also shows us that he's especially thinking about the most vulnerable and least most physically fragile people group, the younger people. So he shares our values. We as human beings want to protect other people. We don't want other people to suffer needlessly. If he didn't care about that, then he would be untrustworthy. But in fact, he seems to care about that. So that resonates with our human nature. He seems like a sensible person. He only wants to do what is sensible. He's not making any outlandish value judgments here. He just wants to be a decent human being, right? So that's a large part of the ethical appeal. There's another ethical appeal, maybe in this middle paragraph. he knows something about the history of baseball. And to understand, have knowledge, it's not necessarily deep research, but he understands basic facts about history. And that is good. If he was uninformed about the basic facts of the subject, then that would be an immediate red flag. But he knows his history, even as basic as it is here. It's not super scientific, but the basic knowledge helps to show he knows what he's talking about, right? So all these three things work together, and it is doing so in a very basic piece of writing. And we can take this same approach and look at any other piece of writing to see how it appeals in those three ways to persuade us.
This is a good point to pause and to complete the first part of your homework this week, a rhetorical analysis of 2 short movie clips. See if you can find the 3 appeals working in a good way or not such a good way in both of these clips. You should post your analysis on the discussion thread and respond to other people's observations. Don't forget to come back and continue this video once you've done that.
So let's talk now about visual images and how those texts, visual texts, image-based texts, use these 3 appeals to persuade us. This is a famous painting by Delacroix, a lady called Lady Liberty, and it took place at the time of the French Revolution. And I'm not going to go into depth here, but I just want to show you how images on their own act in the same way that written texts act on viewers or audience members. You can think about Delacroix's painting as an act of rhetoric. What does he want us to believe or feel when we view this painting? What is he arguing? Now, you have to know a couple of things about the painting. One is that this is an important battle that had been taking place during the French Revolution, and that this woman is a allegorical figure called Lady Liberty. So she represents liberty, and with that, and this is the French flag, and with that, you can start to see what's going on here. This is the lower class trying to fight for. They are the side of the revolution to overthrow the political power that's been oppressing them. Here are some victims of that revolutionary army who has been slain in battle. Here's a young child who's charging into the battle, and many other people who are charging forward to continue the battle over the bodies of the fallen, right? And who's leading them? Lady Liberty. So Delacroix is making a very simple argument here. Keep fighting, young revolutionary fighters. Keep the cause alive. You will eventually be victorious. Now, where am I getting that last part from? You'll eventually be victorious. Well, Lady Liberty is a kind of maternal mother figure, and she comes from Greek. She's like a Greek mythological deity, and so that symbolism suggests that there's a kind of divine support or providence to the war. That those who are fighting on the side of revolution and enlightenment will eventually win because in the divine nature of things, they are on the right side of history, on the right side of the cause. So the divinity symbolized by Lady Liberty is partly the suggestion, not stated explicitly, you will win, but it's suggested that you will win, and your cause is noble, right? Okay, all that is going on in just a simple painting like this, and it works on our logic, it works on our emotions, and Delacroix establishes credibility by how good he paints, by sharing the values of the people fighting for this battle. There is an emotional appeal going on here with the small boy. Look how small he is. You know, this is amazing that such a small child would want to fight for this war. That makes us feel sympathy and pride and belonging, that we belong to an army that even young children feel really committed to. Even if it's sad because somebody like this being killed would be tragic, right? all these emotions are very intense, and we can get swept up by that and feel. We can sort of feel here what it must have been like to be part of this army who wanting to fight for on the side of revolution.
So you can see that rhetorical analysis can get us pretty far in understanding what's going on in a work of art or a visual text. But now I want to talk about compositional analysis, which is a slightly more specific set of tools that are good for analyzing visual texts. The first is dramatic analysis. This is about looking at the work of art or the advertisement and seeing what's going on in terms of the drama or story or the scene that's being depicted. Like in this palm olive soap ad, an old fashioned ad with lots of text and appealing to a female audience, trying to appeal to her sense of fear. Would your husband marry you again? And the first paragraph down here on the bottom of the page reads, "Fortunate is the woman who can answer yes." Yes, your husband would marry you again. But many a woman, if she is honest with herself, is forced to be in doubt. And the ad goes on to explain that women might actually not smell as good as they think because they're not as hygienic as they think because their soap isn't as good. And you need palm olive soap, so make sure you are free of BO. And so in dramatic analysis, we look at these three things: the setting or the scene, the objects in the image, and the characters or actions in this narrative situation being depicted in the scene. So let's actually talk about the characters and actions first. Most prominently, we have this image on the top half of the ad where the husband and wife, we infer, are having a discussion, question mark. Maybe they're just having a uncomfortable moment in the bedroom or in their house. And in the context of the overall ad, "Would your husband marry you again?" we start to piece together possible, it's a little bit of an ambiguous image, but we start to piece together possible explanations for what's going on. Maybe they just had a fight, or they're about to have a fight. They don't feel very comfortable with each other. Partly, I'm getting that from the scene. What is the scene? They're in this dimly lit living room or bedroom where you would expect in more private settings and in more dimly lit settings, you would expect more intimacy between spouses. But here they seem a little stiff. Their bodily gestures and expressions look a little bit like they're not feeling safe or vulnerable with each other, or she's perhaps embarrassed. We also have objects. And in addition to the objects in the upper half painting, we also have this object down here. This is a very beautiful, exotic, attractive woman, and the little caption says palm and olive oil were royal cosmetics in the days of ancient Egypt. And the idea here, of course, in the context of the rhetorical purpose of this ad, which is to get you to buy palm olive soap, is to get you to associate this beauty and exoticism with the ingredients that go into the soap and therefore with the soap itself. And this whole thing presents you with a kind of, and this is positive connotations. This object or this image of this woman creates positive associations. You want this. You don't want this, at least not this situation here, right? So that's dramatic analysis. We can look at another example here, very different, also very powerful use of drama or narrative. No one thinks they'll lose their virginity here. Meth will change that. So in terms of dramatic analysis, setting, objects, and characters and actions, how is this image working to persuade us not to do meth? Well, it's an interesting use of a dramatic situation. We have a very, very powerful use of setting or scene. What is the setting here? This dingy, disgusting, absolutely atrociously disgusting public restroom. We don't like it. It just feels really uncomfortable, like having our faces shoved in it right here. We just already feel our stomachs turning. The objects in the scene help to reinforce that, the disgusting toilet and walls and toilet paper. And perhaps most interestingly, the third part of dramatic analysis is the actions or characters. What are the actions or characters being depicted here? Well, very, very interestingly, they've chosen not to actually depict the scene that is alluded to in the text. No one thinks they'll lose their virginity here. Meth will change that. So instead of showing us a person or a couple people losing their virginity here, the ad, in fact, makes us imagine that or to infer that or to kind of like project that onto this scene. We don't get to see the characters. Maybe even if we had to see actual characters, it would take something away. By having to imagine ourselves, even, or our friends, or our children, having this horrifying experience, imagining that implied scene, those implied characters and actions make this ad all that much more visceral and powerful. Now let's talk about compositional features. I have 6 compositional features. So the first category, the first of the 6 categories, is distance. Is the shot close up or a long shot? Close up shots are way more intense, much like our meth ad here. We are very close up to the scene. That makes it much more intense. Or a long shot, where we back away from the subject and therefore we can see the context of what's going on. It looks more situated in a broader environment, which can be more calming. It can tell more of a story, and so on. The second category is angle. Is the shot low, high, or level? So a low angle shot is looking up at a subject, as if you were near or on the ground looking up at something. That's going to make the subject look more dominant and large than it really is. A high angle shot is above the subject looking down on it, which creates, through perspective, this effect that the person looks smaller or the thing looks a little bit smaller, or that it's weaker, and it has this effect of making it look less powerful, less dominant. Or you can have a level shot, which is just like your regular family photograph, where you're looking at eye level at someone, and this is just your normal everyday human way of looking at the world, and so this feels the most natural. It feels more relational. It feels like we're on equal terms. The third compositional feature is lighting. Shots and scenes can have artificial, natural, bright, soft, harsh lighting, and so forth, and this changes the mood in different ways. Harsh lighting can really make a scene look more negative. I think we would say that that's kind of slightly going on here in the meth ad. The scene looks, the lighting, I mean, a bathroom lighting always looks harsh, these kinds of bathrooms, but the photograph is accentuating that, and harsh lighting is adding to the negative feeling of that scene. Natural or bright lighting, on the other hand, is going to make something look make it have a little bit more of a positive mood, happier mood, and so on. Line has to do with what lines in terms of the objects in the painting or the way that the architecture is working in the painting or the image. Where are the major lines cutting through, or how are they dividing up the image? And are those lines creating a sense of balance and symmetry, or are they creating a sense of disjointedness? And those are very different effects. A more balanced composition is going to create a sense of stability, of safety, and that could be usually pretty positive. It can also be kind of boring or more quiet. A disjointed composition is going to create a sense of either movement and action, or it could be negative, like confusion or disillusionment. So this one is better illustrated. I can explain it better if I illustrate it, so we'll do that in a bit. Scale has to do with whether you are shrinking or exaggerating, making larger different objects in the image. You can obviously show things the way they are naturally in terms of their size, or you can shrink their size down unnaturally or enlarge their size unnaturally for comic effect or to emphasize certain features and so on. And lastly, the color. Color, like a warmer color palette choice or more cool colors or vibrant colors, can affect the mood of the scene as well. Those can be more positive or negative, more intense or less intense, and so on. Let's look at an example and let's practice a little bit. So here is an image of a man sitting on top of the Berlin Wall on the day that the Berlin Wall came down, a very important political event in modern European history. And he's got his fist in the air, and you can see the crowd on the bottom. This is a journalistic photo of this important historical moment. So let's take our 6 compositional feature categories: distance, angle, lighting, line, scale, and color, and see if you can identify it. Let's just at first see if you can identify how you would describe the photo in these terms. Is it a close-up shot or a long shot? Is it the angle low, high, or level? And so on. So pause the video here, see what you come up with for all 6 categories. If you want, see if you can think about how that might explain its effect, its overall effect in terms of its style and its features. And then restart the video and see if we agree. I'll tell you what I see. Okay, what I have here is a photo that is a long shot on the scene. We can see not just the main subject, which is the man in the middle, but we can see the important context in which his action is taking place. We can see the cranes behind him. We can see the crowd on the floor. These are important contextual clues to what's going on. So the long shot allows more of the dramatic situation to be shown. The angle is slightly low. We're lower to the ground looking up at the subject. We're the photo was taken at a normal human eye level, but because the important action going on here is above where humans would normally be standing on the ground, we can see we're looking up at this man, and that makes him look slightly more dominant and powerful, which makes sense. Somebody that's climbed up on a fence is going to look a little bit more dominant and powerful than they normally would if they're standing on the ground. Lighting, pretty natural, maybe slightly harsh. That looks more like a limitation of the old camera that was being used. This looks a little more grainy and washed out. Here is line. So I told you that line was better illustrated. So is the way that the photo is arranged in terms of its lines, its predominant lines, is it more natural and balanced or disjointed? And this is an interesting example of that, because most predominantly we've got this long horizontal angle line in the middle of the top of the wall. Very conspicuous. It's sort of, besides the man, what our attention is mostly drawn to. And it cuts the entire photo in half vertically. Right? We've got the above and we've got the below. And that's the wall right in the middle that kind of dominates the photo. And I think this is actually a slightly disjointed line because it's not, it's angled and it's cutting across the photo like this. So we get a sense that it is in fact, this wall in particular was meant to divide people. And in fact, this wall in this photo divides up this photo. And it's creating a division, a sense of brokenness between the two sides of the world beyond the wall and the world on this side of the wall, which is the point of the photo. It's coming down. These two parts of Germany are now being reunited. So it makes sense that we would be focusing on that. The scale, is it natural, minimized, or exaggerated? It is mostly natural. And the color is, like the lighting, a little bit washed out. And you can see the kind of urban colors of graffiti and their clothing. So maybe, again, the kind of grungy urban feeling. And all this can add to a richer dramatic analysis of the scene. We could do the same thing on the meth ad because it's such an interesting example. Like we said, the distance is a close-up shot to intensify the visceral imaginary scene of. The angle is actually, it's an interesting angle choice too. I mean, look how it looks like we're a little bit lower than we would normally be if we were standing upright. Like, like when you have to throw up, you have to kind of go in low towards to the toilet. That's kind of where we're at here, and that actually adds to the intensity of the photo as well. So it is a level shot. It's more of a level shot, but we're lower to the ground than normal. So it actually functions more like a low shot. It kind of exaggerates things. Lighting is a little bit artificial, a little bit harsh. adding to the negative feeling of the photo. Line. I don't know if there's much to say about line here. Scale. It's a natural scale. I mean, they didn't blow up any of the objects in the bathroom, so it's in fact maybe we could say that the realism of this is actually part of it. The way it's working, it's like so real, and like it would actually look like this if you were in that bathroom at that exact angle. That's how it looks. Everything is true to life, which is scary. And then color. You can see there's nothing bright, there's nothing red, there's nothing green or blue. It's all in the gray scale, all in browns, very bland. And I think that's actually kind of important. There is no, shall we say, like happiness in here. There's no life in here, nothing that we would associate with positive feelings. This is just a utilitarian bathroom for business. And so why would you be doing something as important and intimate as losing your virginity in here? That just feels wrong. And the color is bringing that to our attention, among other things. Very quickly, one more category of compositional analysis is spatial orientation. So our culture has sort of taught us to see certain spatial arrangements, the way objects are relating to each other in a space, with certain meanings. So, for instance, things that are higher than other things tend to be associated with being above them, or I should say more powerful than them, or in control. Things that are higher are in control, things that are lower. And perhaps there's a sense in which what is higher is also better or good, and what is lower is less good or bad. And the same thing is going on with center and periphery. Things that are in the middle tend to be seen as more central and powerful. Things that are on the periphery are seen as, or the margins are seen as subservient or relying on the thing in the center. And then lastly, if you're seeing a dramatic scene especially, what's going on the left of the scene can sometimes, it is implied, be going on, is supposed to be happening before what's going on the right, or the story is sort of read from left to right, and that has a lot to do with the way we read. Our language is read, our written language is read from left to right, and so our sort of brains are naturally trained to start on the left and at the top, and kind of our eye moves down and across to the right of an image, if we're trying to quote unquote read it. And so if a story is being told, we might infer that the temporal sequence kind of unfolds in that direction, like a comic strip or something. So that one is kind of maybe going on here. This is just one moment, of course, just a moment in the bedroom. But if you're getting into the nitty-gritties, there's a sense in which her reaction is, her facial expression is we are processing it as a kind of a reaction or a response to his look. So in other words, this happens first. Whatever he's feeling or thinking, or the facial expression he's sending out, it happens first. And then whatever she's responding, her negative response, or her ambivalence, or her worry, is a response to it. So that's important to tell this story, right? Her life is a reaction to his. She's going to feel good or bad depending on how he feels. And so his ambivalent expression is followed by or causes this ambivalent expression. And that works, that wouldn't work as well if we had flip-flopped to this image. It kind of works most naturally from left to right. Over here we have an ad in which there's a husband and a wife, but here we see that the husband is above the wife slightly, looking down at her. And this can kind of create a sense that he is more powerful than her, has authority over her. She is subservient to him. She certainly looks up to him, literally and metaphorically, for happiness, for meaning. She wants to make him happy. And so that image, that idea, that sort of traditional husband and wife relationship, gender role relationship, is being reinforced by the arrangement of him above her in this scene. So spatial orientation, just one more small way in which meaning can be subtly conveyed in art and visual images. All right, the second activity for the week is for you to practice analyzing images using these compositional analysis features. So when you go to the activity, you'll see I'm giving you an image to analyze or a couple images to analyze, and use these terms and concepts to just try to see what's going on in the image, how it's working, and what effects, what meaning you think is being conveyed. All right, I will see you guys next week. Have a great week.